All right. Hello, namaskara, vanakkam. It's English, Kannada, and Tamil for hello, greetings, whatever. Sorry, this little video essay is a little late, but I'm going to talk about the poet A.K. Ramanujan. And he was fluent in English, Kannada, and Tamil, a couple other languages too. He studied in Sanskrit and Telugu, but he spoke English, Kannada, and Tamil from the time he was small. India as a country has like 447 languages, and its constitution names 22 of them as official languages for the country. So the diversity of like language and culture in India is such that like the next state over, like if you were to drive from Oregon to Washington, they would speak a completely different language and have completely different like cultural norms. India kind of has been influenced by European powers for a really long time. Before British rule, it was actually ruled by the East Indian Trading Company when they began conquering smaller states in the mid-18th century. And they would install rulers who were kind of loyal to them before they eventually set up a governorship. There was a rebellion in 1858 where the East India Trading Company, kind of living at large, lost control of the country, and the British Empire took it over. During this time period, the English language, starting with the East India Trading Company, but especially during British rule, English kind of became the primary language of the country. Before British intervention, India was like a lot of smaller country states, kind of like the Holy Roman Empire. And so like with British rule and everything, English kind of became the primary language of the educated classes and governance and that kind of thing. And it still is today. Now, even though India became independent, English is still the primary language of law, of government, and education there. Hindi too, to a lesser degree, but mostly in English. Like their courts use only English as their language to this day. So kind of into that context, I'm going to say his name wrong. Attapate Krishnaswamy Ramanujan was born in the city of Mysore in 1929. Mysore is in the southern Indian state of Karnataka, where they speak Kannada. His father was a professor of mathematics at the university there, also astronomy, but mostly mathematics. And he kind of had some renown in that realm. His mother was a homemaker who didn't have much of an education outside of like basic educations. Even though they lived in Karnataka, they were culturally and linguistically Tamil, which means they were from the South Indian state of Tamil Nadu and spoke Tamil language. So from the time he was born, Ramanujan spoke Tamil language at home. Out and about in society, he spoke Kannada, and his father, who was like highly educated, spoke English to him. So basically from the time he could speak, he was trilingual, multilingual. And that kind of like easy multilingualism that he was born with became the backbone for a lot of his work going on. We're studying him as a poet, but he was actually primarily like a linguist and a translator of classic and traditional poetry and folklore. I also want to mention briefly that he's Brahmin, which India has this thing called a caste system. It's very, very complex, and I really, my knowledge of it is pretty minimal in myself, but basically it's like a class system that you're born into. You can't change it. And with it, it's like a hereditary transmission of lifestyle, occupation, and social status. British rule codified that caste system into their law and used it to kind of help control the Indian populace as they ruled over the country. Even in modern India, people still segregate by caste. You marry only people in your own caste. And the Brahmin caste, which Ramanujan was part of, is the highest caste. And everyone in that caste traditionally was like a scholar or an educator or a holy man. And so when the British took over, those were the only people they let in any kind of position of power. if they weren't, they had to be Christian or Brahmin or both. So this is kind of what he was born into. It was like a position of privilege, the way that we have affirmative action racially in the United States. They still they do like an affirmative action in India on a caste-based system. Now that people have, they're less like likely to do hereditary like occupation stuff now than they were in the past. So there's like a big movement to get people from different castes into society. So he was born in 1929. Obviously, at that time, it was, less open. So he was kind of born, even though his family wasn't rich, they were kind of middle class. He was born into like an educated, upper echelon privilege. In 1947, India gained its independence from Britain. Ramanujan would have been 18 years old. And he wasn't a poet or a writer at that time. And even as he got older, a lot of his works weren't really political. They were definitely more kind of like searching and shifting. And at that time in his life, in the beginning of college, he was actually pursuing a pre-med degree. He was not originally going for English, but it was his father, the mathematician, who convinced him to switch from biology and pre-med to English. He's described Ramanujan as being intellectually promiscuous from a young age. Ramanujan received his undergraduate degree from the Maharaja College in Mysore. He went around teaching English several places, including Madurai, which is in Tamil Nadu, which we see, mentioned in the poems that we read of his, and it's mentioned in several of his other poems too. And then, after going around teaching, not making a lot of money, he went to Deccan College in Pune and studied linguistics. After getting his master's degree, he received a Fulbright scholarship to study in the United States. He was admitted to the Indiana University and received a PhD in linguistics. It was through the Fulbright program that he met his wife, a fellow Indian scholar. Her name was Molly Daniels, and their relationship was really tumultuous. He was 33 years old when they got married. They were together like almost 10 years and then got a divorce, which is kind of unheard of in the Indian community. They'd get back together like 4 years later and be married again for like another 10 years before they were divorced again. And she was a writer in her own right, kind of living in his shadow a little bit, I would say. After his PhD, he would go on to teach at University of Chicago for, most of his adult life, 30 years, maybe more. And he was in the Department of South Asian Languages and Civilizations and head of the kind of like Dravidian language department, which the languages from South India, Tamil, Telugu, Kannada, Malayalam, those are all Dravidian languages and don't come from like the same Indo-European, Eurasian languages that a lot of like Hindi and Punjabi come from. He spent the rest of his life in America. He passed away in 1993 after an adverse reaction to anesthesia. He kind of grown up threading the needle of multiple cultures already. He's born and raised in a place, but was culturally and linguistically different. And so, he kind of was uniquely prepared to examine and walk that tightrope between an Indian upbringing and the Western ideals he was immersed in through his education. Linguistics and translations were his main works. He considered himself only a part-time poet and kind of had an insecurity around that. His translations of classical South Indian poetry and folklore, from their traditional languages into English were his real passion. And kind of that interaction with those languages became the grounding for a lot of his work. His poetry really explores the plural and conflicting nature of Indian culture and identity, and his place kind of both in it and apart from it. He describes himself as the hyphen in Indo-American, like as the connection between two pieces that make a whole. His poetry is kind of reads almost as a tool for sifting through the layers of context and identity, and the many past lives of a nation and an individual. He's known for kind of vivid metaphor, spare language, and kind of anchoring itself in the myth and paradox of the ancient works he worked with and translated. In his lifetime, he received a MacArthur Genius Grant, and he was awarded the Padma Shri, which is one of the highest civilian honors someone can be given by the Indian government. And he received that for, in recognition of his contribution to Indian literature and letters. He's considered one of the fathers of modern Indian literature, and I really recommend, we only read 2 of his poems for our class. I'd really recommend looking into more of them. They're very good.